3 days before my 35th birthday, I knew my sister would engineer a crisis. It was a pattern I had lived with my entire life. My mother called to cancel an event I had funded entirely on my own, claiming my sister's life was falling apart. My father sent his usual cowardly text message reminding me that I was the strong one. For 35 years, being the strong one was their excuse to bleed me dry. But this time, when they chose her, I did not cry or beg for their love. I disappeared. And 10 years later, they are still paying for the mistake of thinking I would always surrender. Before I tell you how a canceled party turned into a federal fraud investigation, let me know in the comments where you are watching this from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic relatives who confused your loyalty with weakness. I stood in the center of the grand ballroom at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. The space was completely empty except for the event staff setting up for my 35th birthday gala. As the owner of a high-end event planning firm, I spent my life organizing milestones for Manhattan elites. This weekend was supposed to be mine. I was running my hand over one of the 100 gold-embossed invitations when my phone vibrated. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, Patricia. I answered, expecting her to complain about the dress code. Instead, she did not even say hello. "We are canceling your birthday," she announced. Her voice was brisk, carrying that fake sympathetic tone she reserved for charity auctions. "Your sister is falling apart. She needs us right now." I stared at the crystal chandeliers hanging above me. I reminded my mother that she was not paying for this party. I had personally covered the $80,000 non-refundable deposit. 100 guests, including major corporate clients and international vendors, had already booked their flights. "You cannot cancel an event you do not own," I told her. Patricia sighed dramatically. "Chloe, please do not be selfish. Marcus just filed for divorce. Savannah is absolutely devastated. She cannot bear the thought of people drinking champagne and celebrating while her marriage is ending. It would destroy her mental health." Marcus was Savannah's husband, a brilliant black corporate litigator who worked for one of the most ruthless law firms in Manhattan. He was calm, calculated, and entirely too smart for my sister's chaotic lifestyle. I was honestly surprised he had lasted this long. But Marcus filing for divorce was not a tragedy. It was an inevitability, and Savannah using it to hijack my birthday was practically tradition. Before I could point out the absurdity of shutting down my life for her divorce, my phone chimed against my ear. It was a text message from my father, Richard. I pulled the phone away to read it. It said, "Please just let your sister have this weekend. You are the strong one. You always bounce back." I read those words 3 times. "You are the strong one." That exact phrase had been the soundtrack to every theft and betrayal I had ever endured in that family. When I was 18, being the strong one meant watching my parents drain my entire college savings account to send Savannah to a luxury rehabilitation retreat because she had failed out of a semester abroad. They told me I was smart enough to secure student loans, while Savannah was too fragile to handle community college. When I was 28 and starting my event planning business, being the strong one meant my parents emotionally blackmailed me into withdrawing my seed money to bail out Savannah's failed organic skincare startup. They promised to pay me back. They never did. My strength was not something they admired. It was a resource they exploited. Because I did not collapse under pressure, they believed my sacrifices cost me nothing. Meanwhile, Savannah learned that weaponizing her tears was the easiest way to access my bank accounts. Every time I was about to reach a major milestone, Savannah would suddenly experience a catastrophic emergency. A broken engagement, a mysterious illness, a sudden eviction. Her crises always required my parents' undivided attention and, conveniently, my financial surrender. But as I stood in the Plaza Hotel, listening to my mother breathing impatiently on the other end of the line, a cold realization washed over me. This was not just another one of Savannah's attention-seeking tantrums. The timing was too perfect. Tomorrow was my 35th birthday, and tomorrow was the exact day the $15 million trust fund left by my late grandmother Evelyn was legally scheduled to transfer out of my mother's temporary guardianship and directly into my name. For 3 years, my mother had gatekept that estate, citing endless legal delays and fake probate issues. She insisted the Hamptons property was tied up in court and nearly foreclosed on. But she needed my signature to extend her guardianship past my 35th birthday. Savannah's sudden divorce drama was not a coincidence. It was a decoy. They needed me, distracted, exhausted, and feeling guilty, so I would rush home, comfort my weeping sister, and blindly sign whatever financial papers my mother pushed across the kitchen table. "Chloe, are you listening to me?" Patricia demanded, her voice edging into genuine panic. "We need you to come home tonight. We have to deal with family matters. Do not make this about a silly party." I looked down at the gold-embossed invitation in my hand. I did not scream. I did not demand fairness. Arguments only work with people who actually care about your feelings. Instead, I did the one thing they never expected. I agreed with her. "You are right," I said softly, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Family comes first. I will handle the venue." I hung up the phone before she could say another word. I did not cancel the plaza reservation. I immediately called a local women's shelter and donated the entire catered event, the ballroom, and the transportation to their staff and residents. Then I turned my phone on airplane mode. I walked out of the hotel, hailed a cab, and went straight to my apartment to pack a single suitcase. I was not going home to comfort Savannah. I was going to the one place my mother had sworn was off limits. I was driving straight to Grandmother Evelyn's estate in the Hamptons to find out exactly what they were trying to hide. The drive from Manhattan to the Hamptons usually takes a little over 2 hours, but that night I drove with a cold, mechanical focus that made the miles blur together. My phone sat in the passenger seat, completely dark, locked in airplane mode. I knew exactly what was happening back in the city. My mother, Patricia, was likely pacing the hardwood floors of her Upper East Side townhouse, waiting for me to rush through the door. She would have her performance perfectly rehearsed. She would be holding a glass of wine, looking exhausted and burdened, ready to pull me into a false embrace. Savannah would be upstairs, refusing to come out of her childhood bedroom, playing the tragic victim of a sudden divorce. And sitting right there on the kitchen island, conveniently placed next to a pen, would be the legal authorization forms, giving my mother continued control over my inheritance. They expected me to be the good, reliable daughter. They expected me to put my life on hold, absorb their manufactured chaos, and sign away my future just to keep the peace. But the peace they offered was just another word for my compliance. As I navigated the heavy traffic on the Long Island Expressway, I thought about my grandmother Evelyn. Evelyn was a self-made titan. She did not marry into wealth. She built a massive commercial real estate portfolio from the ground up, dominating boardrooms at a time when women were barely allowed in the building. She was ruthless, brilliant, and entirely allergic to weakness. She was also the only person in the family who saw my mother for what she truly was. Evelyn always said Patricia was a parasite wrapped in cashmere. My mother cared only about country club memberships, charity galas, and maintaining an illusion of elite superiority. When Evelyn passed away 3 years ago, she did the one thing my mother could never forgive. She bypassed her own daughter entirely. Evelyn left her crown jewel, the sprawling oceanfront estate in the Hamptons, directly to me. But according to my mother, that inheritance was nothing but a toxic liability. For 36 months, Patricia had fed me a constant stream of legal horror stories. She claimed Evelyn had secretly died drowning in debt. She told me the Hamptons property was locked in vicious probate litigation and slapped with federal tax liens. She even produced emails from a supposed estate attorney claiming the house was rotting from the inside out, plagued by structural damage, and on the verge of being seized by the bank. Patricia played the martyr flawlessly. She told me she had secured a temporary guardianship over the estate, just to shield me from the legal nightmare. She claimed she was spending her own money to fight the creditors, so my credit score would not be destroyed. I believed her because the alternative was too monstrous to comprehend. It was easier to believe my grandmother had made bad investments than to accept that my own mother was executing a multi-million-dollar fraud against me. But as the digital clock on my dashboard crossed past midnight, bringing me into the exact day of my 35th birthday, the lies began to unravel in my mind. The trust transferred full legal authority to me at age 35. If the house was truly being foreclosed on, why was my mother so desperate to get me home tonight to sign extension papers? You do not fight for control over a sinking ship. You fight for control over a gold mine. I turned off the highway and navigated the winding, tree-lined roads of the Hamptons. The air grew colder, smelling heavily of salt and ocean mist. I expected to pull up to an abandoned, boarded-up property. I expected overgrown weeds, dark windows, and foreclosure notices stapled to a rusted gate. Instead, when my headlights swept across the entrance of Evelyn's estate, I hit the brakes so hard the tires skidded on the asphalt. The massive wrought iron gates were not rusted. They were freshly painted and gleaming in the moonlight. As my car idled in front of them, a red sensor light blinked from the stone pillar, and the heavy gates silently swung open. Someone had activated the security system. I slowly drove up the quarter-mile gravel driveway, my heart pounding against my ribs, and stared at the property my mother claimed was a decaying ruin. It was breathtaking. The $12 million compound sat perfectly preserved against the backdrop of the Atlantic Ocean. The expansive manicured lawns were cut with geometric precision. The architectural lighting illuminated the grand columns of the main house, casting a warm, inviting glow across the imported stone driveway. There were no collapsed roofs. There were no bank notices. The estate was fully operational, maintained with an aggressive level of wealth. Parked directly in front of the main portico was a sleek black Bentley. I put my car in park and stepped out into the freezing ocean breeze. I did not call out. I walked slowly toward the wide wraparound porch, my eyes scanning the shadows. Sitting in one of the oversized wooden Adirondack chairs partially obscured by the darkness was a man. He was not a squatter. He was not a bank representative. He struck a match, the sudden flare illuminating his face for a split second before he lit a cigar. The faint, expensive scent of tobacco and aged bourbon drifted through the cold air. It was Marcus. My brother-in-law sat calmly on the porch of my supposedly condemned inheritance. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, his tie loosened just enough to show he had been waiting a while. Marcus was a corporate litigator for one of the most terrifying law firms in Manhattan. I was a man who destroyed corrupt CEOs for a living. He did not do messy, emotional breakdowns. Yet according to my mother, he was currently in the middle of a chaotic, tear-filled separation that was destroying my sister. "You are late, Chloe," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, and entirely devoid of the emotional wreckage my family claimed he was experiencing. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, staring at him. "What are you doing here, Marcus? My mother said you filed for divorce. She said Savannah is having a mental breakdown." Marcus let out a low, dry laugh. He took a slow drag from his cigar and exhaled the smoke into the freezing wind. "Savannah is having a breakdown because I froze her platinum cards at noon today," he replied calmly. "And your mother is panicking because she knows I am standing exactly where she has been hiding her secrets for the last 3 years." He stood up, walking over to the edge of the porch, and looked down at me. His eyes were sharp and unreadable. "I did not come here to hide from your sister Chloe. I came here to wait for you. I knew Patricia would use my divorce as the weapon to cancel your birthday. I knew she would try to drag you back to the city tonight, but I also knew you were finally getting smart enough to walk away." I looked past him at the glowing windows of the mansion. "How did you get through the gates? How do you have the access codes to a house my mother claims is locked down by federal courts?" "Because there are no federal courts," Marcus said, stepping down the stairs until he was standing right in front of me. "There are no tax liens. There is no foreclosure. Your mother lied to you. She has been managing this property like a private resort, paying for full-time landscaping security and maintenance, using the liquid cash left in your grandmother's trust accounts." He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound folder. He held it out to me in the dark. "I filed for divorce this morning." Marcus continued his tone, shifting into the cold, surgical precision he used in the courtroom. "But it was not because we fell out of love. It was because I caught your sister and your mother committing federal financial crimes. They made a fatal miscalculation, Chloe. They forgot that before I was Savannah's husband, I was a lawyer who specializes in forensic asset tracking. They thought they could use my name and my assets to cover up what they stole from you." I stared at the heavy folder in his hand. The reality of the night finally settled over me, heavy and suffocating. The canceled birthday party, the sudden marital crisis, the relentless text messages demanding I come home to sign papers. It was never about family. It was a heist, and they had almost gotten away with it. I reached out and took the folder from Marcus. My hands were perfectly steady. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the crushing weight of betrayal that usually forced me into submission. Instead, I felt an icy, terrifying sense of clarity. The strong girl they had exploited for 35 years was finally gone. In her place was someone ready to burn their entire world to the ground. "Let us go inside," I told him, gripping the documents tightly. "Show me exactly how much they stole." We walked through the heavy mahogany front doors of the Hamptons estate, and the sheer audacity of my mother's lies echoed in every corner of the grand foyer. The house was immaculate. The imported Italian marble floors gleamed under the warm light of crystal sconces. My grandmother Evelyn's priceless collection of contemporary art still hung precisely where she had left it. There was no dust. There were no moving boxes. There was only the quiet hum of a perfectly maintained multi-million-dollar compound powered by stolen money. Marcus led me into the formal dining room. He did not bother turning on the main chandelier. The moonlight spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows was enough. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, pulled out one of the heavy velvet dining chairs, and gestured for me to sit. Then he placed the thick leather-bound folder on the polished wood between us. "I did not leave your sister because we drifted apart," Marcus said. His voice was completely steady, carrying the razor-sharp articulation he used to dismantle hostile witnesses on the stand. "I left her because she is a liability. Savannah and your mother did not just make a few bad investments. They committed a coordinated string of federal crimes, and they used my name to do it." He opened the folder. Inside were stacks of bank statements, loan agreements, and property deeds. He slid the first document across the table. "Look at the signature on the bottom line," he instructed. I leaned forward. The document was a commercial loan agreement from a major private bank in Manhattan. It authorized a massive line of credit. At the bottom, signed in black ink, was Marcus Wright. "It looks like your signature," I said, though I could see a slight hesitation in the loop of the letter M. "It is a very good forgery," Marcus replied softly. "But it is a forgery. Savannah signed it, and your mother notarized it using a fraudulent stamp." He slid another document forward, then another. The paper trail was overwhelming. Marcus explained that before he met Savannah, he had spent a decade building a lucrative portfolio of commercial real estate in Brooklyn and Queens. It was his safety net, the foundation of the wealth he had built entirely on his own as a black man, navigating a legal world designed to keep him out. 2 months ago, Savannah's ridiculous organic skincare startup officially went bankrupt. She had blown through millions in venture capital on luxury office spaces, private retreats for her friends, and an inventory that never actually existed. When the creditors came knocking, Savannah panicked. But instead of confessing, she went to Patricia. "Your mother is a very dangerous woman," Chloe Marcus said, tapping his finger against the forged loan agreement, "because she understands exactly how banking loopholes work." Patricia knew that Savannah was facing immediate legal action from her investors, so they decided to cross-collateralize my commercial properties. They forged my signature to take out a high-interest short-term loan against my real estate to pay off Savannah's business debts. They effectively mortgaged my life to finance her delusions. My stomach turned to ice. Cross-collateralization meant they had tied Marcus' hard-earned assets to Savannah's toxic debt. If the loan defaulted, the bank would seize Marcus' properties. They had risked his entire career and financial future without him ever knowing. How much, I asked, dreading the answer. $3.5 million, Marcus said without blinking. And the first balloon payment was due yesterday. They did not have the cash. The bank sent a default notice to my private office this morning. That is how I found out. I sat back in my chair, staring at the man across from me. For years, my family had treated Marcus with a subtle, patronizing edge. They loved parading him around at their country club dinners to prove how progressive they were, all while quietly whispering that he worked too much and did not give Savannah enough emotional support. But behind his back, they were bleeding him dry. "I froze every joint account at noon," Marcus continued. "I hired a forensic accountant, drafted the divorce papers, and had Savannah served by 3:00. When she read the paperwork, she did not apologize. She did not express remorse. She called your mother." Marcus leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The shadows in the room seemed to sharpen around him. "And that, Chloe, is where you come in." I looked at the documents, my mind racing. What does this have to do with my birthday? Why cancel the party? "Because they are out of time," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto mine. "When I froze the accounts, I cut off their only lifeline. The bank is going to call in the fraudulent loan. When they do, the investigation will reveal the forged signatures. Savannah and Patricia are staring down the barrel of federal wire fraud and bank fraud charges. They are facing real prison time. The only way out for them is to pay off the $3.5 million loan immediately and make it disappear." "But they do not have that kind of money," I said. "My parents live on credit. Their wealth is entirely tied up in social status, not liquid cash." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "But you do." He reached into the back of the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It looked like a standard legal form filled with dense, intimidating paragraphs of financial jargon. "Tomorrow is your 35th birthday," Marcus said. "Tomorrow, the legal guardianship Patricia holds over Evelyn's $15 million trust expires. Full control transfers to you. For 3 years, your mother has been siphoning small amounts from the trust operating accounts to fund her lifestyle, hiding it under the guise of legal fees. But $3.5 million is too big to hide. She cannot just transfer it out. She needs your explicit, legally binding permission to use the trust as collateral to pay off the bank." The pieces fell into place with a sickening snap. The divorce breakdown was not a tragedy, it was a weapon. "Savannah is not upstairs crying over a broken heart," Marcus stated, his voice laced with cold disgust. "She is hiding. The entire crisis was manufactured today to create an emergency so massive that you would drop everything and run home. Your mother knew you would never agree to sign financial documents on your birthday if you were happy and surrounded by friends in New York. She needed to isolate you." I stared at the document on the table. It was titled Family Asset Protection Guarantee. "She planned to sit you down at the kitchen counter tonight," Marcus explained. "She was going to pour you a glass of wine, tell you how devastated Savannah is, and beg you to help save the family. She would frame this document not as a theft, but as a temporary loan to protect your sister from a cruel, vindictive husband who was trying to leave her destitute. She was going to use my skin color, my ambition, and my sudden departure to paint me as the villain who abandoned your sister in her darkest hour. And while you were distracted by the emotional chaos, she was going to have you sign away your inheritance to cover their crimes." The silence in the dining room was absolute. I could hear the faint sound of the ocean crashing against the shoreline outside. My mother had deliberately destroyed my birthday, canceled my joy, and demanded I sacrifice my money, all to save the sister who was actively stealing from both of us. They had relied on my strength. They had banked on the fact that I would be the good, responsible daughter who would step up to handle the crisis. They weaponized my empathy. I reached out and touched the forged loan agreement. I did not feel sad. I did not feel the familiar heavy guilt that usually weighed me down when my family demanded my compliance. I felt dangerous. "Are you going to the police?" I asked Marcus. "I have already drafted the report for the Federal Bureau of Investigation," Marcus said. "But I have not submitted it yet. If I burn them down right now, they will claim ignorance. Patricia will say she misunderstood the banking forms. Savannah will say I financially abused her and forced her to sign things she did not understand. They will spin a narrative of victimhood because that is what they do best." He leaned back, watching me carefully. "If you want to stop them, Chloe, we cannot just accuse them. We have to trap them. We have to let them think they have won right up until the moment the vault locks behind them." I looked around the beautiful dining room at the legacy my grandmother had built and entrusted to me. Evelyn knew Patricia was a thief. She knew Savannah was a parasite. She had left me this empire hoping I would be strong enough to defend it. But strength was no longer about absorbing their blows. It was about striking back. "My mother texted me again while I was driving here," I told Marcus. My voice was eerily calm. "She begged me to come home tomorrow night for a quiet family dinner. She said there is some minor tax paperwork regarding the estate that we need to clear up, so Savannah does not get burdened with it during the divorce." Marcus smiled. It was a small, sharp expression that held no warmth. The corporate litigator was ready for war. "So what are you going to do, Chloe?" I picked up the copy of the Family Asset Protection Guarantee and folded it neatly in half. "I am going to tell my mother that I will be there for dinner," I said. "I am going to tell her that I am ready to do whatever it takes to protect this family. And then, Marcus, you and I are going to spend the next 24 hours taking apart their lives brick by brick." I thought Marcus had shown me the worst of it. I thought the forged bank loans and the fake divorce were the bottom of the barrel. But Marcus simply closed the leather folder on the dining room table and looked toward the closed double doors of the library. "We are not the only ones waiting for you tonight," Chloe, Marcus said. The heavy oak doors opened. A man stepped out of the shadows and walked into the moonlight spilling across the dining room floor. He was an older gentleman, impeccably dressed in a conservative gray suit, holding a silver briefcase. I recognized him immediately, though I had not seen him since my grandmother's funeral. It was Harrison Cole. He was a senior partner at one of the oldest wealth management firms in New York and the primary legal executor of grandmother Evelyn's estate. According to my mother, Harrison Cole had been disbarred. Patricia had told me for 3 years that Harrison had mismanaged the estate, tangled the Hamptons property in endless probate litigation, and refused to return any of my calls. Harrison placed his silver briefcase on the table next to the forged bank documents. He did not look like a disbarred, disgraced lawyer. He looked like a man who was ready to execute a very precise, very lethal legal maneuver. "Good evening," Chloe Harrison said gently. "I apologize for the secrecy, but considering your mother has been intercepting all of my legal correspondence to you for the last 36 months, Marcus and I decided an in-person meeting was the only secure option." He unlocked the briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. It was the original, unredacted last will and testament of Evelyn Hastings. "Your grandmother was a visionary." Harrison began sliding the master document toward me. She also possessed a terrifying ability to read people's character. "Evelyn knew exactly who your mother was. She knew Patricia would consume any wealth she could get her hands on, and she knew Savannah was being groomed to do the exact same thing. That is why Evelyn did not leave a single penny to your mother. She left everything to you: the Hamptons estate, the commercial property portfolio, and a liquid trust fund worth $15 million. I stared at the number printed on the page. $15 million. My mother had sworn the estate was underwater. She had sworn we were barely keeping the bank from foreclosing on the house. There was a condition. Harrison continued tapping the clause at the bottom of the page. Evelyn stipulated that the entire estate would remain in a protected holding trust until you reached your 35th birthday. She believed 35 was the age when you would be established in your own career, independent and ruthless enough to protect the assets from your own family. The full legal transfer is scheduled to execute at exactly midnight tonight. I looked from Harrison to Marcus. If the trust was protected, how did my mother get access to it? Marcus leaned forward. "Because the law has loopholes, Chloe, and your mother found one." Harrison opened a second file. He explained that shortly after Evelyn died, Patricia petitioned a closed court in family law. She claimed you were completely overwhelmed by running your event planning business in New York. She submitted falsified psychological evaluations, claiming you were suffering from severe burnout and financial anxiety. Using those documents, Patricia convinced a judge to grant her temporary administrative guardianship over the trust until your 35th birthday. "It was a temporary key," Harrison said, "but she did a lot of damage with it in 3 years." He laid out a forensic accounting ledger. Line by line, the reality of my mother's betrayal was quantified in cold, hard numbers. Patricia had not just been managing the estate, she had been draining it. Over the last 36 months, my mother had authorized over $2 million in withdrawals from the trust's operating accounts. She labeled them as emergency property maintenance, legal defense fees, and estate taxes. In reality, that $2 million funded Savannah's fake organic skincare company. It paid for Patricia's country club galas. It funded luxury vacations to Europe that they disguised as real estate scouting trips. Every time Savannah had a crisis, my mother simply reached into my inheritance and handed my sister a stack of cash to make her feel better. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the sheer scale of the theft. $2 million stolen, $3.5 million fraudulently borrowed against Marcus. They had burned through over $5 million of other people's money to maintain an illusion of wealth. Why the sudden panic? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why the fake divorce and the canceled birthday party right now? "Because tomorrow is your birthday," Marcus said. His voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "At midnight tonight, Patricia's temporary guardianship expires permanently. The $15 million trust automatically transfers into your name. And by federal law, the moment that transfer occurs, an independent financial audit is automatically triggered to ensure the previous guardian did not mismanage the funds." Harrison nodded gravely. "When the auditors look at the books tomorrow, they are going to find the missing $2 million. Your mother is going to be indicted for embezzlement and grand larceny. She knows this. She has known this day was coming for 3 years. The trap they had set for me suddenly made perfect, horrifying sense. The document she wants you to sign tomorrow night at the family dinner," Marcus explained, "is not just a loan agreement to save Savannah from a bad divorce. It is a retroactive authorization form. If you sign it, you are legally declaring that every single withdrawal Patricia made over the last 3 years was done with your full knowledge and permission. You would be classifying the stolen $2 million as authorized family distributions. They did not just want to steal from me, they wanted me to pardon them for it. If you sign that paper, Harrison said quietly, you cure her crimes. You absorb the $2 million loss. And you pledge the remaining $13 million in your trust to pay off the fraudulent bank loans they took out in Marcus' name. If you sign it, they walk away clean wealthy and completely unpunished. And you will be the one holding the bag for all of it. I looked at the forged documents, the bank statements, and the stolen ledgers. For 35 years, I had been the strong one. I was the one who skipped vacations to work. I was the one who built a business from the ground up while Savannah shopped in Paris on my stolen money. My parents had canceled my birthday party to orchestrate my financial ruin. They thought they could manipulate my empathy one last time. They thought the strong girl would just take the hit to keep the family together. I looked up at Marcus. He was watching me closely, waiting to see if I would crack under the emotional weight of it all. I did not. "When does the audit trigger?" I asked Harrison. "Tomorrow at 9 in the morning," Harrison replied. I nodded slowly. "Do not delay it. Let the audit run. Let the bank call in the fraudulent loan. I want every single federal agency looking at those accounts by tomorrow afternoon." Marcus smiled slightly. "And the family dinner?" "I am going to that dinner," I said, feeling a cold, unfamiliar sense of absolute power wash over me. "I am going to let my mother pour the wine. I am going to let my sister play the victim. I am going to let them put that pen in my hand, and then I am going to watch their entire empire burn to the ground." I reached across the dining room table and picked up my phone. I swiped the screen, disabling airplane mode. The moment the device connected to the cellular network, it nearly vibrated out of my hand. The screen choked on a massive wave of incoming notifications. 47 text messages, 12 missed calls, 8 voicemails. They were all from my family. I opened the text thread from my father first. He did not ask if I was safe. He did not apologize for ruining my birthday. His messages were a masterclass in cowardly manipulation. He wrote that my mother had not slept. He wrote that Savannah was completely broken and they needed me to step up. He wrote that I should stop punishing them just because Marcus was being cruel. Then I opened Savannah's messages. She played the victim flawlessly. She demanded to know how I could abandon her when her husband was trying to destroy her life. She swore she would never do something so selfish to me. I looked up at Marcus. He was watching me with an expression of quiet steel. Before I could say a word, the phone in my hand began to ring. The caller ID flashed my mother's name, Patricia. I did not put the phone to my ear. I accepted the call, activated the speakerphone, and set the device down on the polished mahogany right next to the forged bank documents. "Chloe." "Oh, thank God," my mother gasped. Her voice was breathless, trembling with a perfectly manufactured layer of tears. She sounded like a woman entirely crushed by tragedy. "Where are you? We have been terrified. Your father was about to call the police." "I am at a hotel in the city," I lied. My voice was flat and hollow. "I needed space after you canceled my party." "I know you are hurt," sweetie Patricia cooed, her tone dripping with fake maternal warmth. "I know, and I am so sorry. We will celebrate next week, I promise you. I will pay for a beautiful dinner. But right now we are living in a nightmare. Savannah is completely inconsolable. Marcus has lost his mind." Marcus sat across from me, perfectly still. He slowly leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest as he listened to my mother construct an alternate reality. "He froze all of her credit cards," Patricia cried, her voice cracking for dramatic effect. "He kicked her out of the penthouse. He is trying to leave her with absolutely nothing. I have an emergency meeting with a family wealth attorney tomorrow afternoon to figure out how to protect your sister. But Chloe, there is a small tax form we need you to sign first thing tomorrow." A small tax form. She said it so casually, as if she were asking me to sign a delivery receipt. I looked at Harrison, the estate lawyer, sitting next to Marcus. Harrison pushed the $15 million trust transfer document across the table toward me. That was her small tax form. "What kind of tax form?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully confused. "It is just a standard probate liability waiver," Patricia said quickly, waving away the details with her tone. "It temporarily shifts some of the estate management over to me, just so Marcus cannot claim Savannah's childhood assets in the divorce settlement. We have to build a firewall around the family money, Chloe. You know how these aggressive corporate litigators are." Then my mother did something that made the blood in my veins run completely cold. She leaned into the most vile, disgusting manipulation she could weaponize. She used Marcus' race and background against him. "I always knew there was something dangerous about him," Patricia whispered through the speaker. These self-made men who claw their way up from nothing, they do not understand family loyalty. They only understand taking. He married Savannah to get access to our world, and now he is trying to steal everything your grandmother built. He is a predator, Chloe. He is trying to rob us blind, and we have to protect each other. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her lies made me nauseous. Sitting right across from me was a brilliant self-made black man who had spent a decade building a legitimate real estate empire. He had loved my sister. He had tolerated my parents' condescending country club racism for years, and now my mother was painting him as a ruthless thug trying to steal their old money. She was using him as a terrifying villain to scare me into signing away my own inheritance so she could cover up her own federal crimes. They were the predators. They had stolen $2 million from my trust. They had forged Marcus' signature to fraudulently borrow $3.5 million more. And now she was crying on the phone, begging me to help her destroy the man she had already robbed. "Are you there, Chloe?" Patricia asked, her voice tight with panic when I did not immediately respond. "Please tell me you understand." I looked at Marcus. There was no anger in his eyes. There was only the cold, absolute certainty of a man who was ready to execute a flawless kill shot in a courtroom. He gave me a single, slow nod. "I understand completely, Mother," I said. My voice was smooth and reassuring. "Oh, thank God," Patricia sighed, the relief bleeding through the phone. "What time is dinner tomorrow?" I asked. 7 o'clock, she replied instantly. "Just come straight to the house. Your father is making a roast. We will get this silly paperwork out of the way before we even sit down to eat, and then we can just focus on healing as a family. We need our strong girl right now. I will be there, I promised." And I ended the call. The dining room in the Hamptons estate fell completely silent. The trap was set. My mother thought she had won. She thought she had successfully manipulated my empathy, demonized an innocent man, and secured her stolen wealth. She had no idea that tomorrow night the strong girl was bringing an army. As soon as the call disconnected, the air in the room changed. There was no more waiting. The clock was ticking, and we had exactly 72 hours until the Friday night family dinner. My mother thought those 3 days would break my resolve. She thought I would spend that time feeling guilty, isolated, and anxious to return to the fold. She was entirely wrong. For the next 72 hours, Marcus Harrison and I turned my grandmother's Hamptons estate into a war room. We did not sleep. We did not argue. We worked with the ruthless mechanical efficiency of an execution squad preparing for a final strike. The first step happened at exactly midnight, the moment I officially turned 35. Harrison sat across from me at the mahogany dining table and slid the legitimate trust transfer documents forward. I did not hesitate. I picked up a pen and signed my name on every single page. The moment the ink dried, the $15 million estate legally became mine. Patricia was locked out. Her temporary guardianship vanished into thin air. But taking control was only the beginning. The real objective was cutting off their oxygen. I authorized Harrison to immediately freeze every single operating account connected to the trust. We did not just stop the bleeding. We severed the main artery. Every credit card Patricia held that drew from estate funds was canceled. Every automated wire transfer set up to pay Savannah's rent, her luxury car lease, and her fake business debts was permanently blocked. If they tried to buy a cup of coffee using my grandmother's money, the transaction would decline. While Harrison and I dismantled Patricia's financial access, Marcus initiated the federal trap. He did not operate with anger. He operated with the cold, surgical precision of a corporate litigator who knew exactly how to destroy a hostile entity. He brought in an independent forensic accountant to trace every dollar my mother had stolen over the last 3 years. The paper trail was undeniable. Then Marcus prepared the lethal blow. He gathered the forged commercial loan documents, the cross-collateralization agreements, and the falsified notary stamps Patricia had used to leverage his properties. He compiled them into a massive, undeniable dossier of criminal activity. I watched him sit at my grandmother's antique desk, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop. He was not just filing a local police report. I was going straight to the top. Marcus submitted the full dossier to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, citing felony wire fraud and bank fraud. But he did not stop there. Because Patricia had used trust funds to pay for personal luxury expenses without reporting them, Marcus filed a secondary report with the Internal Revenue Service for severe tax evasion. We were not leaving this up to a family dispute. We were turning them over to the federal government. During those 72 hours, my phone continued to ring. Patricia sent me daily updates about Savannah's supposed mental decline, laying the guilt on as thick as possible. Savannah texted me long dramatic paragraphs about how Marcus was a monster who had left her with absolutely nothing, begging me to remember that we were sisters. I read every single message. I did not reply to a single one. Usually their silence treatments or their guilt trips would send me into a spiral of anxiety. I would have been desperate to fix it, desperate to prove I was the good daughter. But now reading their lies felt like reading a script for a play that was about to be canceled. Their words meant nothing, because their power over me was entirely gone. By the afternoon of the third day, the trap was fully armed. The independent financial audit of the trust had officially triggered. The banks had been notified of the fraudulent loans. The federal agencies had the evidence. My mother and sister were sitting in their Upper East Side townhouse, completely oblivious to the fact that the financial ground beneath them had already collapsed. They thought they were waiting for a vulnerable, compliant victim to walk through their front door and sign away her life. They had no idea they were waiting for the executioner. Marcus packed the massive stacks of evidence into 2 sleek leather briefcases. Harrison finalized the legal injunctions that would prevent my parents from liquidating their own personal assets to escape the incoming fines. Every exit was boarded up. Every escape route was blocked. We walked out of the Hamptons estate and got into Marcus' car. The drive back to Manhattan was completely silent. We did not need a pep talk. We did not need to review the plan. The strong girl they had exploited for 35 years was dead. And the woman who replaced her was ready to serve them the exact consequences they had spent a lifetime avoiding. I arrived at my parents' Upper East Side townhouse exactly at 7 o'clock. The heavy wooden door was unlocked as if they were too eager to wait. When I walked into the formal dining room, the stage was perfectly set for their performance. My father, Richard, was standing by the bar, actively avoiding my eyes while pouring himself a stiff drink. Savannah was sitting at the edge of the dining table. She wore an oversized faded sweatshirt and baggy pajama pants. She had scrubbed every trace of makeup from her face to ensure she looked pale, fragile, and utterly destroyed. My mother, Patricia, greeted me with a tight, anxious smile. She did not even pretend to care about dinner. There was no food on the table, no appetizers, just a single thick document resting exactly where my plate should have been. Next to it was a silver pen. "Sit down, sweetheart," Patricia said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I know this is a lot to ask on the weekend of your birthday, but your sister is barely holding on. If we just get this small liability waiver signed, we can finally breathe and focus on family." I sat down at the table. I looked at Savannah, who let out a pathetic, trembling sigh and stared at the floor. Then I looked at my father. He took a sip of his drink and stared at the wall. I picked up the document and held it up. "Do you know what is actually written in this?" I asked him. My voice was calm, cutting through the heavy silence in the room. My father finally looked at me, his face a mask of weak deflection. "Your mother understands financial matters better than I do, Chloe. Just sign it. Do it for the family." There it was, the cowardice that had enabled my abuse for 35 years. He did not want to know the details because knowing would require him to intervene. I reached for the silver pen. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes locked onto my hand like a starving animal watching its prey. Savannah stopped pretending to cry, her breath catching in anticipation. They thought they had me. They thought the strong, dependable daughter was about to swallow her pride and absorb their ruin. I uncapped the pen. I placed the tip against the signature line, and then I stopped. I set the pen down on the table, picked up my phone, and sent a single text message. The heavy oak front doors of the townhouse swung open. Footsteps echoed through the marble hallway. My mother turned around, her fake smile instantly collapsing. Savannah sat up straight, the frail victim act vanishing from her posture. Marcus walked into the dining room. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, looking sharp, powerful, and entirely unbothered. Right behind him were 2 men in dark suits carrying heavy briefcases. They were private financial investigators. Savannah leaped out of her chair, her face twisting into pure rage. "What is he doing here?" she screamed, pointing at Marcus. "Get him out of this house. He is trying to ruin my life." Before Marcus could even answer, Savannah's phone began to vibrate violently on the table. Then my mother's phone rang. Then Savannah's rang again. The notifications came flooding in a rapid, relentless buzzing that completely shattered the tension in the room. Savannah snatched her phone. Her eyes widened in horror. Her platinum credit card had just been declined for an automated charge. Another alert popped up. Her checking account was locked. Another alert. Her luxury car lease payment had bounced. "What did you do?" Savannah shrieked, looking frantically from her phone to Marcus. "Why are my accounts frozen?" "Because they are not your accounts," I said. I stood up. I reached into the briefcase of the investigator standing next to me, pulled out a massive stack of bank statements, and threw them onto the center of the dining table. The papers scattered across the polished wood covering the fake authorization document. $2 million, I said, my voice echoing off the walls. "That is the exact amount you stole from my trust fund over the last 3 years to feed Savannah's delusions. You did not invite me here to save her from a divorce. You invited me here to pardon you for embezzlement." Patricia's face drained of all color. She stared at the bank statements, her mouth opening and closing like she was suffocating. She tried to grab the papers, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "Chloe, you are misunderstanding everything," she stammered. "I was managing the estate. I was protecting the assets. This family shares everything. We take care of each other." Marcus stepped forward. The room instantly fell silent under the weight of his presence. He looked down at my mother with absolute disgust. "Wire fraud," Marcus stated, his voice ringing with legal authority. "Forged mortgage signatures, grand larceny, and federal tax evasion. That is what you share, Patricia." The audit on Chloe's trust triggered at 9 o'clock this morning. The Federal Bureau of Investigation received the dossier on my forged commercial loans 2 hours ago. "The minimum penalty for what you have done is 10 years in federal prison, mother-in-law." The reality of the situation hit the room like a bomb. The timeline collapsed perfectly. They had no money. They had no cover. They were entirely trapped. Savannah dropped her phone. She slowly turned to look at our mother, her eyes wide with panic. "You told me you took care of this." Savannah screamed, her voice cracking with genuine terror. "You said if she signed the paper, the money was legally ours. You said we were safe." "I did take care of it," Patricia yelled back, completely losing her elegant composure. "I did everything for you. I risked everything to keep you from failing." "You used me," Savannah shrieked, pointing at the forged loan documents on the table. "You are going to send me to jail." My father dropped his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor. He stumbled forward, looking at the $2 million deficit printed on the top statement. "Patricia," he whispered, his voice shaking, "how are we going to pay this back? They will take the house. They will take everything we have. I am not going to prison for you," Savannah yelled at Patricia, backing away from the table. "I will testify against you. I will tell them everything was your idea." The family unit completely imploded. The loyalty they had always demanded from me did not actually exist among them. The moment the stolen money was gone, they immediately turned on each other, tearing themselves apart like scavengers fighting over scraps. My mother was screaming at my sister. My sister was sobbing in real, unmanufactured panic. My father was staring at the floor, realizing his entire life was over because he had chosen to look the other way. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask for an apology. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at Marcus. He nodded, satisfied that the execution was complete. The investigators began packing up the documents, securing the evidence for the authorities. I turned my back on the screaming, the panic, and the ruins of my toxic family. I walked out of the dining room, down the marble hallway, and out the front door into the cool New York night. For the first time in 35 years, I was not carrying their weight. I was finally free. The wheels of the American justice system turn slowly, but when they are fueled by federal financial crimes, they grind everything in their path to absolute dust. The fallout from that Friday night dinner did not stay contained within the walls of my parents' townhouse. It spilled out into the courtrooms, the banks, and the elite social circles of Manhattan, destroying the fake empire my mother had spent decades building. Marcus and I did not have to lift another finger. The private investigators and the Internal Revenue Service did all the heavy lifting. The audit of my grandmother's trust provided undeniable proof of embezzlement. Faced with a mountain of forged signatures and wire fraud charges, my mother realized her usual manipulations would not work on federal prosecutors. They did not care about her tears, and they did not care about our family dynamics. To avoid spending a decade in a federal penitentiary, Patricia accepted a brutal plea agreement. She was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation, intense financial monitoring, and 1,000 hours of manual community service. But the legal penalty was nothing compared to her social execution. She was forced to liquidate the Upper East Side townhouse just to pay back a fraction of what she owed the trust and the federal government. Her name became completely toxic. She was stripped of every single charity board seat she held. The country club revoked her membership. The wealthy friends she had spent my stolen money to impress instantly stopped returning her calls. My mother was left with a cramped rented apartment in a neighborhood she used to mock, utterly humiliated and entirely alone. My father did exactly what cowards always do when the ship starts sinking. He abandoned it. The man who had spent 35 years telling me to be the strong one, so he would not have to deal with conflict, suddenly found his spine when his own retirement accounts were threatened. The moment the federal fines were levied against my mother, Richard filed for divorce. He claimed he had no idea about the fraud, desperately separating himself legally to salvage his meager personal assets. His loyalty to my mother expired the exact second it started costing him money. But the most satisfying collapse belonged to Savannah. She tried to play the fragile, abused victim in family court, but she forgot that Marcus was a corporate litigator who specialized in destroying hostile entities. He did not show her an ounce of mercy. Armed with the forged commercial loan documents, Marcus turned the divorce proceedings into a complete legal slaughter. The judge was so disgusted by the fraud that he completely invalidated the cross-collateralized debt, restoring Marcus full ownership of his real estate empire and denying Savannah any claim whatsoever to his assets or spousal support. For her entire life, Savannah's manufactured crises were heavily funded by my stolen inheritance. She was allowed to be fragile because I was forced to pay for the consequences. But the real world does not finance professional victims. Without my mother pulling money from the trust to bail her out, Savannah was immediately evicted from her luxury lifestyle. She was blacklisted from the elite social circles that now viewed her as a massive liability. With no startup capital, no wealthy husband, and no stolen trust fund, my sister had to do the one thing she had avoided her entire life. She had to get a real job. Today, the golden child of the family works as a front desk receptionist at a dental clinic in New Jersey. She spends 8 hours a day answering phones, dealing with angry patients, and taking orders from managers who do not care if she feels overwhelmed. Her tears no longer summon a rescue squad. They just get her written up by human resources. She lost her fragile facade because she finally ran out of people willing to fund it. 10 years have passed since that Friday night dinner. I am now 45 years old, and the life I built looks nothing like the one they tried to force me into. The Hamptons estate no longer resembles the isolated fortress my mother tried to steal. It is completely transformed. Today, my grandmother's property operates as a premier retreat and creative incubator exclusively for female entrepreneurs. The massive oceanfront grounds are filled with women building their own empires completely free from the toxic expectations and financial abuse of their families. Standing near the outdoor terrace illuminated by the string lights overhead is Marcus. He is no longer just my former brother-in-law. Over the last decade, he has become my closest friend and the lead legal counsel for my entire organization. Tonight he is holding a glass of champagne, laughing easily, and leaning comfortably against his beautiful new fiancée. He survived my family's betrayal and built a life that is completely untouchable by their chaos. Inside the main foyer of the estate, right where my mother used to stand and spin her endless web of lies, hangs a framed piece of heavy watermarked paper. It is the final sealed letter my grandmother Evelyn left for me. I made sure it was the first thing every guest sees when they walk through the front doors. I read it every single morning to remind myself of the lesson it took me 35 years to learn. The letter simply says, "Strength is not the ability to endure others draining you. Strength is knowing exactly what you deserve and ruthlessly cutting off those who intentionally stand in your way." As the sun finally sets on my 45th birthday, I step away from the crowd and walk into my private office overlooking the ocean. Resting on my polished desk is a small pale envelope that arrived in the mail this morning. I already know who it is from. It is a birthday card from my father. Inside, he has written a long, pathetic apology, talking about how much he misses me and begging for a chance to reconnect. Even after 10 years, he is still hoping that the strong, dependable daughter will eventually feel guilty enough to let him back in. I look at his handwriting for a long moment. I do not feel angry anymore. I do not feel the crushing, suffocating obligation that used to define my entire existence. I just feel an overwhelming, brilliant sense of peace. I smile softly, trace my finger over his name, and then drop the entire card into the paper shredder beneath my desk. I stand there for a few seconds listening to the mechanical hum of the machine turning his empty apologies into dust. I turn away from the desk and walk out of the quiet office. I step out into the brightly lit grand hall where the music is playing loudly. Hundreds of people who genuinely respect, support, and value me are waiting to celebrate my birthday. No one is staging a fake crisis. No one is asking me to sign away my future. For a very long time, society taught me that walking away meant I was losing my family. But looking around this magnificent room, feeling the warmth and joy of the life I actively chose, I finally understand the truth. I never lost my family. I simply removed the tumors.